Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix and welcome to the FRAGS of Dead Rising 3. Now you may be thinking to yourself, FRAGS as in the deaths or kills of Dead Rising 3? Well, not exactly. FRAGS is an acronym. It represents 5 points to view a game and its content at. F for funny, humorous moments of gameplay. R for rips, going into the problems and issues with the games. A for aesthetic, the design and beauty behind the sounds, the graphic, and the story as well as the environment. G for gameplay, the gameplay analysis, and S for summary, a final verdict on the viability of the game. Shoryuken! This is the third game in the Dead Rising franchise, so the basics are still here. Zombie hordes, a time limit, story, and optional missions scattered throughout a playground of a world. The core gameplay elements from previous Dead Rising games is still here, but several of them have been altered in various ways. If you're a Dead Rising veteran, play Nightmare mode, as this is more of your traditional mode that you are used to in the franchise. The regular story mode is very forgiving, and no point did I ever feel threatened in terms of any side or story mission in terms of time. In fact, it was a breeze. I only died twice during the game, both due to me not really paying attention, blame the ADD. Nightmare mode on the other hand was more traditional. It had a 3-day time limit. Time passed by a little bit more quickly. Zombies and psychopaths were meaner and tougher, and they could deal more damage while taking more damage as well. If you're looking for a non-stress experience, then play story mode, as it's a walk in the park to enjoy the game more than the original games were. But if you want any sort of challenge in the game, play Nightmare mode. Dead Rising is known for making anything into a weapon and fighting off the zombie horde, and there's no exception here. Things are littered about, from the useful, such as lead pipes, 2x4s, wrenches, katanas, to the downright bizarre, ketchup, gems, CDs, and various other things. There's only a limited amount of new weapons in Dead Rising 3, at least on the non-combo weapons side. No, it is clear that combo weapons are the name of the game in Dead Rising 3, and it's made clear from the get-go that it is your greatest defense against the zombie hordes. In Dead Rising 2, combo weapons were introduced but only could be made at certain workstations, after gathering the right weapons. These weapons were scattered throughout the map, and you had to search and find the right items to make the more powerful weapons in question. Dead Rising 3 does away with workbenches, allowing you to use a blowtorch to make combo weapons anywhere, which is a nice addition to the game. It allows for flexibility, giving you combo weapons on command at times. In terms of the combo weapons, there were some interesting combinations that were there. The Blam Blow, which was a crossbow crossed with a Roman candle, was able to take out large chunks of zombies at one time. Toy Globes in particular I found hilarious, especially with the squeaking that came along with it. The Pummel Blast, which was a sledgehammer with grenades taped to it, was particularly useful in boss battles. But there's a flip side. I found it too easy to make combo weapons. Many times, even beyond the finding of the initial recipe, which would of course have the items right there to make, which makes sense, this is the first time you've gotten it, I found myself running across the combos in the world way too easily, even when they made no logical sense in the game's world. It hurt the challenge of the game at times, as some of the fun of the original games was to make do with what you had, such as using a parasol to run through enemies or throwing CDs desperately because you were low at health and it was the closest thing you had around you. It's even made worse with the abilities to take any category of item via skill upgrades to fill blueprints, but that's an optional choice. The DLC portion of the game didn't help, letting you access very powerful weapons early on in the game if you choose to get them out of the locker. Now, don't get me wrong though, the combo weapons here are fun as hell and feel a lot more varied than in games past. There are a lot more ways to get through the zombie hordes than the typical hack and slash offense, and they were refreshing because of that. With a vastly increased number of zombies on screen, it is fun to just maul through them over and over again, but there's a simple problem with Dead Rising 3's gameplay: it's too easy. And this is not just in the story mode, but in Nightmare mode as well. Too many times, the horde seem more of a nuisance than a threat. You're given some pretty powerful weapons early on in the game, and they're able to cut through the horde with no problems. It's fun to wreck a horde with all the weapons, of course, there's no doubt about that, but the progression of power that comes with playing through the game was weakened due to it. Early on in the first 2 games, the horde was a menace. You had to figure out a way around them or to get through them. Later on, you of course could take care of them with more powerful weapons, and you yourself having become more experienced. This does change later in the game with larger hordes and special zombies, but at this point you've gotten even stronger and have more at your disposal to deal with them. There's definitely an emphasis on vehicles to get around, and the physics definitely have changed to compensate for it. There's pushback and momentum regarding your card, so attempting to launch yourself through 1,000 zombies, you will slow down when you hit herds, which I did appreciate. Getting used to the environment though is going to be necessary, as looking at your mini-map at first glance won't give the detail regarding barriers that get in your way to your objective. While the vehicle section of gameplay got a little bit getting used to, it did add a little bit of variety into the game that was appreciated. You eventually learn the way around the world, and it becomes less of an issue as gameplay progresses. The survivors are definitely stronger this time around, actually being helpful in situations and being a plus in battle. I really didn't have to babysit survivors at all like in previous games. Give them a weapon and they'll go to town and not get themselves in dangerous situations. One of the things I did like was that I could easily run ahead, and while the survivor wouldn't exactly be happy with me, generally kept up and dealt with it. Good strides in gameplay here on what was a very huge problem in the original Dead Rising. Overall, this still is a Dead Rising game at its core. Zombies, psychopaths, and time-based missions. Granted, the story mode is not where I would suggest. I would go through the Nightmare mode. However, some of the alterations in Dead Rising 3 were a hindrance, and especially the progression of power. If you're able to get it to run at high settings, Dead Rising 3 is a beautiful game at some points. The hordes in question can feel alive, as the zombies in question are reasonably varied to show different people who have been torn from their lives. They make a claim that each zombie is unique, and honestly, I can't refute that. Lighting is well done, as the game has distinct looks in both the night and daytime. Humor is what drives the most enjoyment out of Dead Rising 3. The game's attempts to be serious, and in doing so probably reinforces the humor more than anything else. Your choice of outfits will continue over into the cutscenes, which can make it even more comical depending on the situation. As to the backdrop of the game, San Bernardino was a forgettable experience for me. The backdrop of the city had no memorable landmarks. This was the first attempt for Dead Rising to be in more of an open environment and an open world in a city rather than a shopping mall, and because of that I think it suffered. At least on the outside that was the case. Only when getting inside the buildings did the environment start to come alive. I think it helped describe the city before the outbreak, seeing food scattered along a restaurant floor, or seeing the backdrops for the psychopath battles. The story was a lot more powerful in indoor environments with one major exception. Speaking of story, this story was a mixed bag as well. Sure, zombie-related plots have been done before, so we are getting a little bit used to them. I'll say this, the plot itself was at least interesting enough to want me to continue listening to it. The implications of a society's freedom versus control of a situation has been done before. I do feel that elements of the story dropped off the face of the earth, such as the chipping element regarding Zombrex. It felt like it was supposed to be a strong emphasis of the story early on, but seemed to disappear at later stages of the game and cause confusion when it wasn't used to the antagonist's benefit at the time. The implied element of Nick and Rhonda and several of the crew having been chipped due to the use of the illegals term of characters like Annie suggests that they had been chipped all along, and left a big enough plot hole in the story to take away from the villain's overall plan. I felt the story was a little bit too heavy-handed in foreshadowing as well. The main storyline conclusion did wrap up reasonably and did attempt to tie elements of the previous game together, which I did appreciate. The characters were all over the map on this one. Nick himself was a pretty plain protagonist, and while he did have moments, such as flexing his muscles after Jerry, was pretty low-key and stable throughout. That may have been intentional by Capcom, making you shape the character that you were playing. The main co-op character Dick was completely forgettable story-wise, like he wasn't there. While it wasn't necessary to force a co-op experience, I do feel that games before, such as Dead Space 3, were able to incorporate a co-op character in the story without them being forgettable. The strength of the characters I think were in the support characters. Rhonda, Annie, Diego, Gary, and Red. They definitely had personalities that made them stand out, made me interested in their story as it went along. On a whole, the psychopaths were also strongly characterized too. In particular, they went one route with one of the psychopaths that hadn't been seen before that I really enjoyed, but I won't spoil that for you. Theming around the psychopaths being the 7 deadly sins was an interesting route, and ultimately I did have fun with it, and did do the job in making me believe that people were truly nuts in some cases. Savable survivors felt more alive thanks to the addition of voice clips and with interaction with the player. Several of them were a lot more unique than in games past, from an old lady dying with cancer that just wants to see the city one last time before she died, to a southern belle looking to find her family after just arriving via bus. These characters had personalities, yelling for zombies to get off a car, or praising you for making a new combo tool. When you'd run off, they'd yell at you for running far ahead, or call out for help if they needed it. It was a strong enhancement over previous Dead Rising games and helped make that personal connection to relate to in the game. As a whole, Dead Rising 3 does have its moments within the story and the environment, but overall, it won't be something you remember 10 years down the road. Let's get the big one out of the way. The performance of this game is problematic. It was the biggest offender on this list. I admit, I had several problems with performance at first, and had to deal with that throughout my PlayStation. I found myself having to scale back the graphics despite having a reasonably powerful machine at my disposal, one that was able to run Crysis 3 and Wolfenstein with no problems whatsoever. Performance has improved with the recent patch. If you're looking at playing Dead Rising at its highest settings, I would recommend caution. For a select few it worked, but many people ran into problems, to the point where the game wasn't playable. There are game-breaking bugs that Capcom is trying to address, but it is causing major problems for the community right now. Unfortunately, they aren't getting resolved in a timely manner. In particular, NVIDIA card owners need to be aware that a lot of people are finding fixes rolling back drivers, at the suggestion of Capcom. Optimization of the PC port is poor, and may be the biggest negative that the game has going for it. It could be a strong reason to hold off on buying this title. Unfortunately, the amount of communication from Capcom regarding these fixes is low right now. And unfortunately for the PC audience, this isn't exactly the first time they've had problems with a PC port. One of the biggest disappointments I had was the lack of psychopaths. Yes, Dead Rising 3 is a zombie game, but one of the things that I think distinguished it was its psychopaths. People who broke down after the outbreak in various ways, making them mentally unstable and violent. There's a lack of them in this game. Dead Rising 2 had nearly double the number of optional psychopaths than Dead Rising 3, and Dead Rising 1 did as well. The battles themselves also were mainly easy. The only one that reasonably gave me trouble was Jerry. One of the things that I harped on earlier, you became way too strong very quickly, as the middle third of the game seems like a breeze. You get strong combo weapons very early on. It makes the Horde weak in comparison. This seems to be balanced at the last third of the game, where the Hordes pick up and the special zombies pick up as well, but for a while there, the zombies were more of a nuisance than a threat. The open setting in the game has its strengths, but one of the strongest weaknesses I had was attempting collecting in-game items. The other games were semi-open. You were free to move around, but when you needed to get somewhere, there was an obvious path to take. However, that wasn't so much the case in Dead Rising 3. When attempting to get new blueprints, there were times that I would seemingly be right on top of the item in question, having no idea where it was and attempting to figure out if it was at a different height or if I was missing something altogether. A height indicator for the items on the minimap would have been welcome, as several games have implemented it where if you got within a certain distance of the item's height, up-down arrows for example, would have shown to you if you were on the right track. It leads to my next point too. Don't show items that you can't get on the minimap. If it's behind a locked door, something that I can't get into until a set piece is unlocked, don't show me the item on the map. All it does is cause frustration, as attempts to find an alternate route or a different door reveal to be fruitless. Let's talk about QuickTime events. It's one thing to include them, and unlike some, I think they can add to an experience. However, only when it's not expected. Unfortunately, the animation that plays when a QuickTime event is coming up is a telltale sign of which button to press, because it's always the same button. It lessened the QTE's effect overall. Having to press X for the 100th time when a zombie broke through the door of your car became more of a chore than an exciting battle for control. The lead up to the final end boss in the final chapter was repetitive, and unnecessarily changed locations repeatedly, extending the process out for no good reason. It really sucked to have that happen at the end of the game when the climax should have been occurring. The performance of this game still is crap. Let me see if they've got anything on the website here. Okay, going in. I'm pretty sure that's not the case anymore. Good job, Capcom. In the end, Dead Rising 3 is a fun as hell game, but is it worth buying? I enjoyed my time with it, I liked the story, and loved mowing through zombies, but should you buy it right now at full price? The answer is no. While a good amount of players are having problems with the game, and when the gameplay does suffer, the experience is not enjoyable at all. It's clear that the game was optimized to be a console game, and was brought over later to the PC, given the timeline of course, but wasn't taking into account the PC advantages during that time frame. The full cost of the game is $49.99 right now, and that's spending a lot of money hoping that your game is going to work with it well. If Capcom proves that they can help fix the issues, as drivers and in particular Nvidia seem to be a problem, then the game is worth the cost. But as of right now, this game is a game to pick up during a Steam sale, when the cost is $19.99 or below. It's a flawed game, even with the optimization there, but still worth your time to play through. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this gave a good impression of Dead Rising 3 on the PC. Any discussion, comments, or feedback down below in the comments section, and like this video if you enjoyed it. See you next time and have a good day.